While on a trip to Australia with her best friend, a 17-year-old girl suddenly vanished without a trace. The police and her family were left wondering what had happened to her for 18 years despite the thorough search for her and the numerous witnesses that came forward. One shocking fact emerged when this terrible mystery was finally unraveled. The police had all the information they needed to wrap up the investigation quickly, but their carelessness and lack of professionalism caused it to take almost 2 decades. In today's video, I will narrate the story of what happened to Haley Dodd. Haley Dodd was born in the United Kingdom on the 30th of November 1981 to Raymond and Margaret Dodd. She grew up in a fairly large, close-knit family with 5 other siblings. When Haley was younger, in the year 1990, she and her whole family immigrated to Australia, settling in the village of Mandorah. Throughout her elementary, middle, and high school, Haley Dodd was an excellent student. She participated in sports and had intentions to further her studies. She wanted to become either a veterinarian or a school teacher. However, before making a final choice for a career, Haley wanted to go on an adventure, exploring the whole of Australia. For this reason, at the age of 17, when she obtained her high school diploma, she and her best friend Lisa left on a trip to Western Australia. Their goal was to spend a few months away from home, rather than just driving through nearby towns and tourist hotspots. The 2 friends planned to look for temporary jobs while traveling in order to pay for their living expenses, which included food and transportation. They planned to enjoy their vacation by hitchhiking within cities in Australia, which at the time didn't seem like a risky idea. 1 out of 100 young women were being killed while hitchhiking at the time, but given how many people did so safely, there was no widespread fear sparked by these crimes. Haley Dodd was certain that even with a friend by her side, her parents would forbid her from traveling by hitchhiking. She then assured them that she would be taking the bus instead. In July 1999, Haley and Lisa traveled to a place called Dongara. They already had a part-time job where they would work as day laborers on a nearby farm there. They were residing at a camping ground where they got a space to sleep for the night in exchange for a small fee. These camping grounds are very popular in Australia, primarily due to their low prices. A few days before starting work, Haley made the decision to use the rest of her free time to travel to a family friend's farm near Moora. She had once been there and wanted to visit them after a long time. She planned to hitchhike to the farm, but Lisa was reluctant to let her leave alone. Haley insisted that she need not worry and would return soon. As a parting gift, Lisa gave Haley herself a defense folding knife and some cash so she could call her from the phone booth. On the 29th of July, at around 8 a.m., Haley left the camping site and headed towards the farm. Meanwhile, at the farm, family friends were expecting and waiting for her, but she never showed up. Being concerned, they decided to inform her mother. Margaret Dodd immediately called the police out of concern that something might have happened to her daughter. She first dialed the 000 emergency number and explained the situation at hand. After hearing her story, the operator concluded that there was nothing urgent about the situation. She, however, told Margaret to go file a missing person report at the nearby police station, which she did. Going through the timeline of events of that day, the detectives started looking for Haley. They started off by going to the campsite where Lisa was staying. After being told why they were there, Lisa was shocked to learn that Haley never made it to the farm. She was able to provide the police with a detailed description of each outfit Haley wore on that particular day, as well as a sketch of the earring Haley was wearing. She had purchased these earrings a few days prior to her disappearance. She was drawn to the piece of jewelry when she and Lisa went shopping to treat themselves to some inexpensive items. Haley had no idea that those earrings would hold the key to unlocking the terrible mystery of her disappearance at the time. Investigators released details regarding the missing teenager, including her description. Despite being almost 18-year-old, Haley appeared much younger. She stood at 152 centimeters tall and weighed a little over 40 pounds. As the investigation progresses, the first witness was easily found by the police. It happened to be the truck driver who had given her a ride that day. According to the man, Haley had reportedly knocked on his truck's window at a gas station and requested a ride to a place called Mora, where the farm was. Although the trucker was en route to another farm, he agreed to give her a ride for the majority of the distance. She was later dropped off by the man above 50 kilometers from Mora, close to the town of Ashangara. He further reported that Haley had been in a cheerfully good spirits, talking about her trip the entire way. He had also given her $15 to get something to eat after she said she was running low on cash. In case she needed a ride back, he also left her his phone number. Since he traveled that road almost all the time, he wouldn't have minded giving her another ride. Detectives later received a number of calls from witnesses who claimed to have seen Haley in the vicinity. The police eventually came to the conclusion that Haley had been walking on foot along the northwest road towards Mora, based on the witness's testimony. Evidently, she was unable to hitch a ride from a driver at the gas station. As a result of that, she then made the decision to walk alongside the road in an effort to hitch a ride. Another witness claimed that he gave Haley a ride to the Winjardi Road turnoff before she continued walking towards her destination. The following witness was a female driver who was passing by. She caught sight of Haley just as she was getting out of another car and walking towards Mora. More than 10 witnesses in total called the police. Detectives came to the conclusion that Haley was last seen at around 11:45 a.m. on the Northwest Road, about 50 kilometers from Mora. However, there was another witness who, despite not having seen Haley, nonetheless told the police something unsettling. According to the man, his engine was overheating, so he stopped on the side of the Northwest Road. While fixing up his car, he briefly heard a dog barking before a female piercing scream. Since it might have been far away, he was unable to see the source of the noise. The road traveled through a barren, flat area with little background noise. Giving all of this information, the police's prognosis was disappointing from the onset. Eddie Rowe, the lead detective, decided that they should search for the body rather than think about the possibility that Haley might still be alive. However, management forbade him from doing so. Haley Dodd's case was left at the status of the missing person case. A murder investigation would have given the police more options than a missing person investigation, but they lacked any leads that could have helped them find Haley, so they started looking for potential kidnappers right away. They were able to locate several local suspects in a short period of time, but the police eventually concentrated on 3 men. One of them was a teacher at a nearby school, another worked there as a part-time gardener, and the third lived close to where Haley had disappeared. Each of them offered an alibi and pleaded not guilty when questioned. Although the police were unable to find any evidence to the contrary, they were unable to conclude with certainty that they were innocent. However, things quickly changed drastically. A neighbor of one of the suspects went to the police. He revealed to them that on the day Haley Dodd went missing, Francis Work, a 43-year-old school gardener, had taken his car to go shopping in Mora. Around 1 p.m. later that day, Francis came back to his house, and he noticed that inside the car had suffered damage. The dashboard had signs of an impact, and the turn signal knob was broken as well. The neighbor was unable to ask him what had happened to the car because when Francis Work arrived home, he threw his shopping bags in the kitchen before mounting his motorcycle and leaving again. The police decided to re-interview Francis because they thought this story was strange. Francis, however, claimed that he was many miles away from the alleged location of Haley's abduction. He claimed that after getting home, he immediately rode his motorcycle to a party in the city of Perth. He said he wasn't able to make it down there because he went over the speed limit on the way there, which resulted in a serious accident that made him go to the hospital. With the information at their disposal, the detectives were able to ask the obvious question: where was he going in such a hurry? Investigators decided to request a search warrant for his home after deciding that his own testimony was extremely strange. The police searched his home but were unable to uncover any possible evidence. Forensics also examined the car. They searched the car and took the seat's cover off in order to examine them properly in the lab. However, all these resulted in nothing, and Francis Wark was let off the hook. Not long after that, he moved to Queensland on the other side of the country, leaving the detectives without any leads while the case was left hanging on the shelf. Detectives made attempts to move the case forward by locating fresh witnesses and evidence, but all efforts were futile. After 8 long years, in 2007, Francis Wark returned to the police radar. At that time, he was residing in a remote area of a small town. Next to his door lived an elderly couple who were relaxing one morning on their porch when they suddenly became horrified to see a young woman running in their direction completely naked and covered in blood. When she requested for help, the couple immediately called the police. The victim claimed that the previous evening she had attempted to get a ride. A man pulled up in front of her and offered to take her to wherever she was going. During the journey, the man then informed her that he had to go to one location in order to fill up his car with gas. They later pulled up to a house in the middle of nowhere where he called her inside and offered her some tea, which sadly she didn't deny. He attacked her shortly after that, and after a brief struggle, succeeded in taming and tying her up. The victim endured horrific violence and torture for the next few hours. Additionally, her attacker stole one of her earrings by ripping it off. This man was Francis Wark, as you may have guessed. In the morning, the woman realized she could run once the rope was off her hands and her legs were free. She immediately started trying hard to loose the rope. After she succeeded, she watched out for Francis Wark, waiting for him to get as far away as possible before dashing out through the back door. One smart move to note in the midst of this chaos was that the woman took off her necklace and threw it under the bed before leaving. She decided to leave some personal items in Francis's home out of concern that the police might not find any evidence to support her claim when she eventually reports him. And guess what? That single act of hers actually worked. After searching Francis' home, the police discovered the identical necklace and arrested him right away. After the trial, he quickly came to the conclusion that he could not get away with what he had done and made the decision to come clean. He then received a 12-year prison term. Although Francis' arrest was reported to the Western Australian police, who handled the Haley Dodds case, they showed no sign of interest whatsoever. The 8-year-old cold case, which so closely resembled the facts of Francis Wark's crime, was not revived by the police. The detectives only agreed to reopen the case at Haley's mother's insistence. However, they quickly came to the conclusion again that Francis was still innocent in the Haley Dodds case, and that there was nothing they could do to change that. The police rebuffed Haley's family's repeated requests for a thorough investigation, saying that they had already done everything within their power. Haley's relatives spent tens of thousands of dollars on private investigators in a futile attempt to wait for law enforcement assistance. It was 6 long years before the case changed course. It was discovered in 2013 that the police had simply forgotten about the evidence, which ultimately proved to be the key to cracking the case. Tracy Horan, a medical examiner, submitted a request to reopen the Haley Dodds case. The reason was that the exact same car seat covers that had been taken from Francis' neighbor's vehicle in 1999 had been discovered in the evidence storage. Unexpectedly, it happened that for 14 years, no blood, DNA, or other forms of evidence had ever been tested on the seat covers. When the forensics went through the covers more thoroughly this time, they discovered a woman's earring that had become tangled in the material. Detectives went back to the drawings Lisa drew for the police shortly after her friend vanished. They came across the drawing of the earrings Haley was wearing that day and were shocked to see that it was the same earring found in the covers of the car's seat. Experts also found a human hair that had been removed from the car's mats. DNA sample was taken from the hair, and It matched Haley Dodd's mother's DNA. That implied that the hair was almost certainly Haley's. However, the likelihood was not 100%, making it very challenging to bring charges against Frances as soon as possible. As soon as the information reached the media, the police came under heavy fire. This evidence was right under the investigators' noses for 14 years, but during that time, they never remembered it. Naturally, such a discovery altered the course of the investigation, and the detectives traveled to another region of the country to question Frances once more. Frances Work was still serving a jail term at the time for assaulting a woman in 2007. He told the detectives the same story that he had told them 14 years earlier. He denied being involved in the murder and insisted that he was out shopping in Mora when Haley Dodd was kidnapped. The nearly 4-hour-long interrogation produced no results, so the police were forced to get the case ready for trial. He wasn't officially charged with Haley's murder until 2015, at which point he was deported to Western Australia. The trial started in late 2017. All of the evidence presented, according to Frances' defense, was circumstantial. His defense claimed that the earrings Haley Dodd purchased were both inexpensive and popular. Therefore, another woman might have left it in the car. Although not an exact match, the hair in the car showed a 100% match to Haley's DNA, though it would have been extremely unlikely to make a mistake here. That was sufficient for the attorneys, but the judge didn't find any of these arguments convincing. If Frances' crime from 2007 hadn't occurred, perhaps he would have still had a chance to escape punishment. However, he did more than just abducting the hitchhiking woman. He also stole her earring. The prosecution's theory that the man was hoarding the victim's earrings as trophies ultimately raised more questions about him. As a result, the judge sentenced him to 21 years in prison after finding him guilty of kidnapping and killing Haley Dodd. All of these occurred while his prior sentence was still being processed. Frances Work was sentenced at age 62, but the story did not end there. The jury was of the opinion that Frances abducted, killed, and then hid Haley's body, which was never discovered. Frances also refused to admit to his crimes. In 2018, Haley's mother worked to pass a new law that states murderers are not eligible for parole if they refuse to reveal the location of their victim's body. Haley's mother repeatedly asked the killer to reveal where he hid her daughter's body, but he refused. 2020 saw the occurrence of another notable occasion. Francis's appeal to have his sentence overturned was accepted by the court, and a new hearing was scheduled. His attorneys continued to argue that he would not have had time to abduct Haley Dodd between his trip to Mora and his return home. However, the court stated that the time span gave him well enough chance to do so, especially given the haste with which he arrived home and immediately left for Perth on his motorcycle. Even though the hair and the earring were still considered to be two of the most important pieces of evidence against him, Frances was still successful in having his sentence reduced. The court reduced his sentence from 21 years to 18 years after finding him guilty of involuntary manslaughter. But because of a law that was passed in 2018, he would still be unable to leave prison if he refused to say where he hid Haley Dodd's body. The detectives continue to be busy because of another aspect of the entire case. They are confident that Frances has victimized numerous additional women, and that none of them have been able to escape his wicked ways. This psychotic man may have been offering pretentious rides to young women on the streets for years. Only he knows what happened to them. The disappearance of a woman in late 2005 was one of the most likely comparable cases. She had hitchhiked to another city and had vanished without a trace. Because Frances knew the victim personally, the detective in charge of the case is certain that he abducted her, but there is currently no evidence to pin him to the crime. It might turn up again in the police's evidence room a few years down the road, but that wouldn't matter to the criminal. Frances would have been charged for the murder of Haley Dodd in 1999 if the police had conducted a more thorough inspection of the car. We currently have no way of knowing how many lives he destroyed in the years that followed, but sooner or later, the mystery may be unraveled. This entire story has another unsettling aspect. Do you recall that the police named 3 main suspects, including Frances, during the preliminary stages of the investigation. 5 months after Haley Dodd vanished, one of the suspects killed his wife. The second, who worked as a teacher, ended up being among the worst child predators in Australian history. Unfortunately, the police were powerless to stop them at the time of Haley's murder before they could harm someone else.
What do you think it will take to solve this case?
DNA, definitely. They haven't, there was no other evidence there. Whoever did it did a good job at taking everything with them. What they didn't take was DNA.
Every day, murders go unsolved and eventually become cold cases. The victims' families wait for justice, which sometimes takes ages to come. While some perpetrators of these evil acts go on to commit more brutal murders, some repent and hope not to get caught. Recently, the families of unsolved murder victims have seen a glimmer of hope with the use of improved DNA technology, used to solve decades of cold cases. Here are 3 of the cold cases eventually solved with DNA in the 20s. Fawn Cox was 16 years old when she was raped, strangled, and eventually killed in her bedroom on the 26th of July 1989. Fawn was a junior at Northeast High School and had been working as a cashier at Worlds of Fun, a Kansas City amusement park, until 11 p.m. that evening when her mother, Beverly, had picked her up and brought her home. Her family said she had gone straight to bed due to how exhausted she was. Fawn's younger sisters Amber and Felisa would often sleep upstairs with her, but on the night she was murdered, she was the only one in the room upstairs. While she was sleeping, someone snuck into the house through an upstairs window and raped and strangled her in her bed. There were semen stains left behind on the bed. By the next morning, when Fawn's alarm went off at the usual 9:30 a.m. to wake her up for work and she didn't turn it off, her mother and sister came upstairs to check up on her, only to discover that she was still in bed but lying dead. Her family claimed to have not heard anything from downstairs. They said the sound of their loud air conditioner must have drowned out any noise coming from upstairs during the attack. Felisa Cox mentioned in an interview that, though the family dog got agitated at a point during the night of her sister's murder, but they attributed it to the dog being pregnant. Fawn, who was said to have just gotten her learner's permit 3 days before her murder, was a church lover. She attended church regularly with her family, and she loved Amy Grant music. When she died, her father, John, took comfort in the family's faith. The murder of Fawn shook the whole of Kansas City. In August of that year, 3 teenagers were apprehended regarding her murder, but they were later released when DNA tests failed to conclusively link them to the crime. The police stayed on Fawn's case. They followed every lead but got nowhere. The community and the family of Fawn Cox also refused to give up. Anytime there is an advancement in DNA testing, they would make sure the police used it in Fawn's case. At a point, the police were frustrated when a search of combined DNA index system, a database containing the DNA of every felon in the United States, failed to find a match. Fawn's family raised money and spoke to the media. They bought billboards that went up in Kansas City. They fought for years to get advanced DNA techniques used on the case. They held fundraisers, even offering to pay for it themselves, as the Kansas City police could not afford it. Eventually, the FBI paid for a genealogy DNA testing, and on the 11th of November 2020, after narrowing down their list of suspects, the police finally revealed Donald Cox Jr., Fawn's cousin, who was 5 years older than her, as the murderer. Unfortunately, justice could not be truly served as he had died of a drug overdose in 2006. To further prove that Donald Cox Jr. was the murderer they had wanted for decades, The investigators who had worked on Donald's death investigation had retained his blood sample during his case because they had sensed foul play in the circumstances surrounding his death. They then compared DNA from the blood sample with a DNA profile from the bodily fluids recovered from Fawn's bedroom in 1989 and discovered a match. Fawn's parents, who now have closure to the case, were sad but relieved. They said they had sometimes wondered if Donald had killed her. It turned out that their suspicion was right all along.
There's closure. The answers aren't always what we were asking for, but there's closure.
The fact that it's someone that you know well and it's actually a relative, how is the family dealing with that?
I think we're doing okay. We're doing okay. Just having answers helps.
Carla Jan Walker was born on January 31st of 1957 in Fort Worth, Texas. She was a 17-year-old cheerleader and student who was kidnapped out of her boyfriend's passenger seat on the 16th of February, 1974. Carla and her boyfriend, Rodney McCoy, were sitting and waiting for friends in his car in the parking lot of Brunswick Ridgely Bowl after attending a Valentine's dance week at Western Hills High School when suddenly, the car door swung open and the two were attacked and assaulted by an unknown person who mistakenly dropped the magazine from his gun during the attack. While trying to fight off the bad guy, McCoy was knocked into unconsciousness with the back of a pistol. When he woke up later, he discovered Carla was gone, and the last thing he remembered was her shouting, "Rodney, go get my dad." McCoy then went to Carla's house to tell her parents what had transpired. They called the police, who searched the area where she had been kidnapped. Her purse and the magazine clip the attacker left behind were the only items recovered in the parking lot. Several days later, on February 20th, 1974, Carla's body was found in a drainage culvert at Benbrook Lake. According to autopsy results, she had been alive for 2 days after her abduction, and she had also been beaten, raped, injected with morphine, tortured, and strangled to death. The police were said to have quite a number of suspects on their list during the first phase of investigation. One man named Glenn Samuel McCurley was questioned shortly after Carla's murder in 1974 because the gun magazine found in the parking lot of the bowling alley was tied to him. Apparently, he had recently purchased a pistol that used the same magazine as the one found on the crime scene. However, McCurley told investigators that his gun was stolen from his truck. After taking and passing a polygraph test, he was let off the hook. At this point, there was nothing tying him to the murder. The police, who desperately wanted answers, had obtained evidence of semen and other bodily fluids from the crime scene. They had also preserved Carla's clothing for further investigation, but due to lack of advanced technology in the 1970s, the killer could not be identified, hence, the murder remained a cold case for 46 years until in September 2020 when the police got DNA samples from the trash can outside McCurley's home. After confirming that the samples matched the DNA evidence gotten from the crime scene in 1974, investigators returned to McCurley's home where he invited them in for a talk. He repeated the same story he told the police in 1974. He claimed not to have killed anyone and said he never knew Carla Jan Walker. Investigators then asked him for a DNA sample, to which he agreed and signed a consent form. They took 2 chick swabs and sent them alongside with Carla's clothing for analysis. They were sent to Othram Inc., a lab that specializes in advanced testing of small and degraded DNA. They ended up developing a full DNA profile of the perpetrator. 6 days later, the swabs gotten from McCurley matched the DNA found on Carla's bra. This was enough to arrest and charge McCurley with capital murder. In August 2021, McCurley started his trial. The evidence presented in court included the pistol he had claimed was stolen in 1974. The pistol was found carefully hidden inside his home. By the third day of his trial, McCurley pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. He is currently imprisoned in Gibb Lewis Unit and will be eligible for parole on the 21st of March 2029. As of the time of making this video, he still maintains his innocence. He once told a reporter that he pled guilty because he had had enough hounding. Finally arrested, Jim Walker, Carla's younger brother, is glad that the family eventually has a face to the gruesome murder of his sister. Jim, who became a police officer nearly 45 years ago after his sister was killed, said their parents had both died without seeing the killer, but he was able to fulfill the pledge he made to his mother.
46 years, 7 months, and 5 days, or 17,053 days ago, Carla was abducted. I would like to sit here and tell you, no, I never gave up hope. But there were really dark times, and watching the pain my mom went through. Sorry, guys. But you know, I can tell you, this whole case being resolved is a thank you God moment. I know people don't like to hear that quite often, but it is.